Hello, and welcome to the first of classes that I am doing just because I want to help people learn how to play EVE Online. Um, I have made several videos to benefit EVE University. Those are all classes that were in a curriculum that EVE University uses, and I help develop some of those classes. But these are classes that I am developing and teaching just for the benefit of anyone and everyone without necessarily, like, it's not for anyone. I have branded the shit out of this um, with, my alliance, but it's not specific to Brave. When I make a class for Brave, it goes up on Brave's YouTube channel. It doesn't go on my channel. So these are just classes for the benefit of everyone by me, Amoni Panala. So today we're going to talk about finding your playstyle, right? How do you know which playstyle is for you? What's the kind of content that's going to be for fun for you? So we're going to look at the different play styles in EVE Online. And we're going to look at it in two different ways. We're going to look at play style by location and play style by activity. Now, it is worth saying that when we look at play style by location, there may be more than one activity that you can do in each location, but each location, the activity is going to look a little different. And so, we're really kind of trying to go through the different iterations of these activities and how these different locations change the way that you engage with the game, right? So we've got high sec, low sec, null sec, wormhole, and Pochfin. We've got PvP, PvE, industry, mining, trade, logistics, and exploration. So these are all things that you can do and places you can go to do them, and where you do them is largely going to impact what your experience with these different activities is going to be like. Okay? So, if we're being honest with ourselves, most players, not all, but most players have a primary play style and generally do one or more other play styles as a form of income or just a break from their primary play style. And also, it's worth saying that no play style could exist without the others, especially when we're talking about activities, right? So I am going to use play style to talk about both location and activity. And when I say activity, I'm talking specifically about the kinds of things that you can do in EVE Online, whereas play style can both refer to um, a place where you play, a place in New Eden, and the activity. So I know that's a little confusing, but I think you'll understand as we go through this presentation. So I made this helpful little graph, or at least I hope it's helpful to sort of try and help understand, the interconnectedness of all the different types of activity that you can do, all the different play styles, right? So in many ways, it starts with mining, right? Uh, the miners collect the raw resources, which go to the industrialists who build the ships, modules, structures, drugs, all that stuff. They build it. That's industry. Um, then you've got, that stuff goes to a number of different places, but I slotted it in with PvE um, because PvE Those folks are the ones who harvest unique modules, BPCs, and items that can then be used to uh, get unique modules, unique ships, unique items that can be a competitive edge in other activities. Then you've got logistics. And without logistics, things stay in one place and they don't go very far. The market crashes. People can't get the fancy modules that they like. Uh, Basically, everything comes to a grinding halt without logistics. And not to be confused, I know that logi or logistics also means um, they're the healers of EVE Online. I know that's confusing, but in this context, we're talking about the moving things in game, right? Moving things from one part of New Eden to another, and without logistics, you don't have anything else because everything stays in one place. And if we all had to move all of our own stuff all the time, it would be a massive pain in the ass, and we would all be pretty miserable, and the game just wouldn't be what it is right now. Trade. Trade is important because it makes our everything go, right. This is the oil. Um, this is the grease that makes things move. Um, there's a lot of it can be hard to envision, even for myself, right? It can be hard to imagine what it would be like if we didn't have trade in this game. And I think like the whole thing breaks down if we don't have trade, because I think our markets, what makes the game work the way it does is in part the dynamic markets, and traders make that possible. Without traders, we wouldn't have that dynamic market. It might, we might have a market that is serviceable, right? We can buy and sell stuff, okay. But there's something about EVE Online's market that because it mimics certain aspects of um, real world market trading and things like that, that make it possible uh, to actually shape the game, right? And I think the game just wouldn't be what it was without the dynamic market that EVE Online has. And then you have PvP, right? PvP, they're the ones who buy ships on the regular. Not that PvEers or miners or, um, the logistics folks, not that they're not buying ships, but in my estimation, right, it's the PvP folks who are going to buy ships, modules, drugs, implants, and all that other stuff the most frequently. They're the ones that are buying the shit out of this stuff, right? And so, you know, uh, they are an essential component, right? Um, to the sort of ecosystem of shit that gets done in EVE Online. Without PvPers, uh, your markets have no movement. Your industrials have very few customers, right? Um, the or the PvEers don't have anyone to sell the fancy shit to, right? Or they have very few customers to sell their fancy shit to, because at some point, um, everybody has their ship that they like to do PvE in, and well, I guess we've just won the game. Like, then Eve Online becomes solvable in a way that I don't think Eve Online is solvable today. So let's take a look at playstyles by location. Starting with HiSec. HiSec has lots of PvE potential, lots of mining potential. Um, HiSec has the largest trading hubs, right? So you've got Jita 44, you've got Amar, you've got Heck, Renz, Dodixie. Um, I feel like I'm forgetting one, but whatever. These trade hubs, are um, accessible to pretty much everyone, and this is where some of the most trading happens. Not that trading doesn't happen elsewhere, but like there's a reason Jita 44 is known to just about everybody, and that's because so much trading happens, so much stuff moves through Jita 44. Um, HiSec is relatively stable. There are very few times where HiSec is disrupted by random shit. Now, this has changed a little bit since the Havoc expansion, right? Because now you have what's known as corruption, where pirate influence corrupts the corrupts low sec, which then spreads and can spread into high sec. So you can have pockets of instability where high sec behaves like low sec, and low sec behaves like null sec in many regards. Um, but for the most part, high sec is a fairly stable, consistent place where um, you can reliably have certain expectations for what high sec is going to be like, and it's a place with minimal risk. Now, that does not mean that high sec is safe, right? But the risks are known, and there are ways to minimize those risks, right? On the flip side, high sec is not a place where you're going to get rich quick. The rewards for uh, being in high sec are small, right? The amount of ISK that you can make in high sec is small, with some very particular exceptions. Um, the yields on your mining are going to be small. The yields on gas is going to be small, right? And everything is taxed to shit, right? There's a reason why most people don't do planetary industry in high sec, and that's because of taxes. Taxes fucking suck. Nobody likes them. But taxes are probably the worst in high sec that I know of, anyway. There is also sudden and disruptive violence, also known as ganks. Ganks happen in high sec. Like I said, minimal risk but not safe, right? And high sec is a place that is. There are some people whose entire playstyle is about uh, making sure that high sec is not 100% safe, right? They like ganking in high sec. That is their playstyle. I don't necessarily get it, but like, you know what? It's a way people like to play. It's cool. I know some people can make a shit ton of money doing it, so um, that's one of those exceptions, right? Ganking in high sec can be very profitable. Um, so, you know, one of those exceptions to the whole low rewards, low value yields. High sec can feel a bit crowded. Now, there's plenty of high sec out there. There's plenty of high sec space out there if you're willing to be far away from trade hubs, right? If you don't care about being close to a trade hub, you can be out in the middle of fucking nowhere, and you can have plenty of space to yourself. Nobody's gonna fucking bother you. Nobody gives a shit. But if you want to be close to the trade hubs, especially Jita or Amar, you might start to feel a bit crowded because lots and lots of other high sec groups want to be in or near those trade hubs. So be prepared for that. And also just be aware that there are hostile NPCs in high sec, right? There's the Triglavians and Eden Com, and those two are kind of pains in the ass, or they can be. Um, I definitely have to watch out for Eden Com every time I go through high sec. Um, you know, so fuck Eden Com, by the way. Okay, low sec. So let's look at low sec. So, benefits of low sec: unique mechanics that reward PvP. Okay, um, you've got faction warfare, which is basically just like it's privateering, basically, right? If you're familiar with old piratey terms, it's privateering. Um, you're a sub you're a subcontractor for your empire of choice, right? Um, you get to fight against others, and the game is going to give you LP and money for doing it, right? Um, you're gonna you're gonna get all kinds of goodies for doing PvP, right? And that's a low sec thing. Low sec PvP is fast paced with and high intensity, right? This is where some of the best nano pilots are gonna fly. Um, you're gonna see all kinds of really cool shit out in low sec in terms of pilot skill in PvP. Um, there are NPC stations, right? Um, and there are unique PvE opportunities, right? So, like, the whole plexing thing, right? It's not a high value earning potential, but it is stable, and it is unique to lowsec. Now, not all of lowsec is faction warfare space. So, if you want something that's even quieter, you could go to lowsec outside of the faction warfare areas, and you'll get a bit of a different experience there. But I am largely speaking to um, the faction warfare areas of low sec. Not that other areas of low sec are bad, but looking at it on the whole, I think a lot of people when they think low sec, they think of faction warfare. Um, Low sec is a safe haven for criminals, right? So if you enjoy shooting people up in high sec and low sec, your security status is going to go down. Low sec is your best friend. Low sec is going to keep you close to high sec, where you can get off some more ganks and maybe do some gate camps in low sec. Um, but Concord isn't going to chase you in low sec. Low sec is also the place for some top tier role playing opportunities, right? Um, I One of the things that surprised me the most when I joined Minmatar faction warfare was um, how much role playing there was in it, like just casual role playing. Like it wasn't even like people were not acting as their characters, but they were definitely, like the just top tier propaganda for the Minmatar Republic. I was not expecting it, and you know you can be as involved or not involved in that as you want. It's not a requirement that you role play, right? But people can get really into it, and it makes sense because there is so much potential there, right? You are fighting against another empire's militia, or you're a pirate and you're fighting against two different empires' militias. right? There is just so much potential for role playing there, and it can be a lot of fun if that's something that you're into. Low sec is where you start to see reactions, um, and the money that you can make in low sec is pretty good, right? I wouldn't say it's the highest, but it's definitely solid. And I would also say that it's more stable than other places, right? So it's moderate and stable, right? Now the downsides of low sec are that PvP happens all the time, um, and obviously PvP happens in high sec all the time. But when we're talking about PvP happens all the time in low sec, I mean that is just the way it is. You step into low sec, and it's like stepping into um, the world of uh, uh, of uh, Deadwood, right? Where people are just shooting people left and right, and nobody gives a fuck, right? Gate camps are extremely popular in low sec. Um, Gate camps do happen elsewhere, but I feel like low sec, for whatever reason, is a really popular place to do gate camping. Um, so be aware of that. Um, People like to play station games in low sec, right? So because of these NPC stations, people will dock up and undock, and it's like waiting for people to aggress. Then you've got the station guns and shit like that, and all of that is happening. And if you're just trying to do logistics, right? If you're just trying to move shit from A to B, it can be difficult when people are fucking around on the stations, right? So, be aware of that. Um, if you are the kind of person who wants to see numbers go up for your side, you are probably going to want to be involved or in the larger, militia or pirate faction. You may want to join a corporation, or at least be in the Discord and participate in the fleets for your faction, right? Um, because that's really the only way you're going to see any significant movement in terms of percentages for conquered space and shit. Um, so be aware of that, because it can be really demoralizing if you as an individual are flying around, you're plexing, you're blowing up others, you're getting all this LP, but the numbers don't change because you're just one individual, and the impact of your actions as an individual probably don't amount to a whole lot in terms of the grander war that's going on. Low sec is high risk, maybe not as high risk as some other places, right? NPC stations mean that you can still, if you can base yourself out of an NPC station and never need to worry about being evicted. Um, but it's still pretty high risk, right? Your ships can be blown up at any time, and nobody is going to give a single fuck. Um, if you join faction warfare, you are effectively locking yourself out of the opposing empire's space. So if you join the Keldari, you can't go into Galente's space without being attacked. If you join Galente, you can't go into Keldari space, which means you can't fucking go to Jita, okay? Um, which is very annoying. Um, it's very annoying. If you join the Mimitar, you're not going to be able to go to Amar. If you know, so on and so forth. If you join the pirate factions, you're not going to be able to be in Empire space because they will attack you. Um, and that's another way that PvP happens in high sec, right? Because You are a legitimate PvP target for the opposing Empire faction, or if you're a pirate, for the Empire factions, plural, right? And there is the potential for standings loss. Um, I talked about security standings, but also faction warfare does lower your standings a small amount towards the empire that you're fighting. So every time that you rank up, right? So there are ranks in the militia, and every time you rank up, you will lose standings with the opposing faction. Now it's not huge; it's totally a recoverable thing, but it is something to be aware of. And if you don't want that, you do need to be aware of it and pay attention, because otherwise you will be hurting your standings with um, that opposing empire faction. All right, so nullsec. Now, I'm lumping nullsec, NPC nullsec in with sovnull. However, I acknowledge that those two are different. I have played in both NPC nullsec and sovnull. Obviously, I'm in Brave, so I have some experience in sovnull, but I have also played NPC null. I lived out in PC9 with Eve University. I quite enjoyed that, but I acknowledge it's very different, right? So I will try to distinguish between the two when it's important, right? So in nullsec, there is no Concord to interfere with your PvP. You want to shoot somebody, you fucking shoot that motherfucker. It's cool. That's what nullsec is, right? That is just the way it works. Um, in nullsec, there is the possibility for sovereignty. Um, this is the only space where you can actually own your space. Um, the sovereignty mechanics only exist in nullsec, right? Everywhere else, even in wormhole space where nobody owns anything, there's no NPC structures, nothing like that. Like, that's a very different kind of ownership, and you're only keeping it as long as you can keep it. And there's all kinds of fuckery that can happen that make it different than the sovereignty mechanics, right? Um, you have access to XL structures, so um, you know that is also true in lowsec. I believe you can put a keep star in lowsec, and technically you can put a keep star in wormhole space, although uh, most people don't. The smart people don't. You have access to super carriers and titans. Um, that is a Sovnal specific thing, right? Just flagging that there. Um, Nullsec is where the massive space battles happen, right? Anytime that mainstream media picks up on EVE Online, what's going on in EVE Online, chances are it is a big ass Nullsec fight, right? A massive brawl with thousands of players, 100% tie-dye, all that shit. That's that's most likely what's happening. Nullsec has high value combat anomalies, right? Now that is, I will say that for the most part, I would say that is a solve null specific thing. Like, the combat anomalies you find um, in NPC null are going to be more valuable compared to high sec and to some extent low sec, but like the truly high value combat anomalies are going to be in Sovnal. Um, there is a ton of high value mining opportunities between um, ore anomalies and gas and um, moon goo, right? The moon goo in nullsec is prime. Uh, or I guess as they say in Cyberpunk 2077, it's preem, right? It's premium shit. Um, that is the good stuff. You know, you get your R64 Moon Goo, right? That shit is good shit, and it's extremely valuable. Okay. Um, Nullsec has massive alliances that you can join for resources and for lots of friends, lots of people to hang out, talk to. Um, and Nullsec still does have NPC stations, right? There are parts of Nullsec that are called NPC. They are not, you know, you can't own that as a player owned alliance. You can't own that region of space. Um, and so you've got your NPC stations there. So it is possible to live in Nullsec and live out of an NPC station. I don't think it would be very fun, but you could do it if you wanted to. Now the downsides are, you know, obviously there's no Concord protection, right? It can be both a pro and a con, right? If you are used to Concord and the threat of Concord protecting you from harm, uh, you know, reducing the risk and the chances of you getting fucked over by somebody else. Well, nullsec has no Concord, and there are no gate guns either, right? Um, all there is you and your own ship and your own skills, right? Um, nullsec is big, like really big, right? Space is really big, but nullsec is like uh, really big, and there are lots of open. There's a lot of open space. Not necessarily, not necessarily that somebody doesn't own it, right? I don't think there's anywhere in nullsec that is not owned by someone. That being said, there's a lot of space where not much is happening. And so if you're looking for something to do in nullsec and you filament your ass into somewhere, you could end up in some very quiet pocket that hardly anybody spends any time in, right? And it could be that way for 10 jumps in any given direction, right? So, you know, be aware of that. And of course, if you want to participate in sovereignty mechanics, generally speaking, you are going to need to join an alliance that holds Sov. Um, now, I I put that as a con, right? Because it does mean that you need to invest in that alliance, right? This is not the kind of thing that you can really sample, right? I suppose you could potentially put like an alpha alt in one of the alliances or one of the corps, and maybe you can get a sampling that way without having to put your main in. But I think most alliances kind of frown on that shit. They'll call you a spy or something. And sometimes nullsec can feel very stagnant, right? Because uh, you really have to be motivated to find certain kinds of content, especially PvP. And sometimes, despite all your best efforts, it doesn't happen. Or somebody runs away like a little chicken shit motherfucker, right? And there ain't shit you can do about it. It's just the way it happens. Um, it is also important to be aware that because nullsec is what it is, everyone and anyone can show up and wreck your shit, right? So at any given time, somebody can filament into nullsec, into your little area of nullsec, and they can ruin your day if you let them. It is very important to keep that in mind, um, especially since filamenting into nullsec is a um, you know, that's just a thing that people do, and you know, it's a thing that will absolutely happen to you at one point or another the longer you spend in nullsec. Also be aware of tie dye, time dilation. right? Tie-dye is short for time dilation. And it is a um, so EVE Online is somewhat unique in that there are no instances, right? So like when you play WoW, you log in, you pick a world, right? This was also true in RuneScape, right? You pick a world, and that's an instance, right? That's an instance of the game, and you are not going to run into players from another instance in that game. Eve doesn't have instances, it just has one massive instance. Now, because of that, that can put a huge strain on the servers when lots and lots of people get in there. So, what the developers did, CCP did, is two things. One, FCs and higher ups in alliances can request that certain systems be reinforced temporarily, right? So CCP will divert resources to a specific place so that the server is going to perform exceptionally well on a certain in a certain region of space, so that it can handle the massive strain that having thousands of players in it all at one time puts on the server. And the other thing that they do, and this is all across New Eden, but generally you're only going to see it in nullsec, um, is the time dilation. And what happens is, as more players come into a system and put strain on the server enacts time dilation, which slows everything down, right? And this allows the server to process all the requests that are coming in, right? So every key that you hit, every command that you enter, every button you push, all that shit is getting processed by the server. And the time dilation allows the server to catch up and process thousands of commands, right? Because you think about all the commands you enter, all the buttons you push on a given day, and then multiply that by 1,000 or 2,000 players, right? That's a fuck ton of commands happening in one small area that the server manages, in addition to everywhere else that the servers are handling. So you've got to fucking, you know, this is the compromise. And tie-dye can be annoying as fuck because let me tell you, your ship's moving in slow motion. You ever try to watch a movie at like 0.25 speed, right? Try watching a John Wick movie at 0.25 speed. It will melt your brain, right? That's tie-dye. Okay? All right. Next, we have wormhole space. The place that holds a special place in my heart, right? So wormhole is a place where you can find massive battles that normally don't trigger tie-dye. So when we're talking about massive, obviously it's relative to scale. Um, we're usually talking about like 100 people, right, in a system when we're talking about wormhole. So it could be like 100 to 200 people in a system. At about 200, you might see a small amount of tie-dye, but generally speaking, you're not going to see tie-dye in wormhole space. There is high-value combat anomalies there, right? There's high-value ore anomalies. The moon goo is shit there. I will tell you that right now. So don't even bother. There is also high-value gas. And there is TrueSec planetary industry. Now, I wasn't exactly sure if this was the right phrasing for this, but I'm hoping that those of you who do planetary industry on the regular know what I'm talking about, right? So, planetary industry is affected by the security status of the system, right? And if you have a perfect -1 uh, security in the system, you're going to get the best planetary industry possible, right? Um, and so wormhole space, all the wormhole space is TrueSec -1, right? So you're going to get the best planetary industry possible, regardless of what class wormhole you're in. Um, there is also an ever-changing environment, right? Everything's changing all the time. You're never going to have the same. You're never going to be connected to the same system all the time, right? And that means that there's also the potential to find new content whenever you want. On the flip side of that, there is no local for Intel, right? Um, I have a feeling that if I ever return to wormhole space after having lived in Sovnal, um, that it's going to be an adjustment for me to get used to the fact that there is no local. Hopefully, I will have a bit of a I'll be ahead of the curve though, just because I have not relied on local for so long, um, because I sort of made wormhole my life for a while. It can also feel trapped and claustrophobic, right? Because you live in one wormhole, right? And you don't know when you're gonna, unless you have a high sec static, right? You don't know when you're going to be able to get to K space again, right? And for that reason, it can feel a bit like you're locking yourself in, right? There is also the potential for sudden and disruptive violence, aka ganks. Um, you might be thinking, well, this is wormhole is a place where PvP happens all the time. Like, why would you point out ganks specifically? Well, the thing about it is like, because in wormhole space, you're doing all the things in wormhole space. Um, you're doing your crabbing, your mining, your industry. All that shit is happening in wormhole space. That means that there's a lot more chances of you being in a ship that is not PvP capable or has minimal PvP capabilities when suddenly a fleet of Nighthawks shows up and they're ready to fuck shit up, right? That's what I mean. Wormhole space is also a zero-sum territorial dispute. There is no asset safety, right? Um, so, uh, Wormhole and Sobnull are similar in regards to their zero-sum territorial disputes, right? Because if you lose your Sov, you lose your Sov. That's just kind of, you can try and get it back, but like, you lost, buddy. But the difference with Wormhole Space is it is truly a zero-sum game because there is no asset safety. And if your shit drops, right, that's it. Like, you might, you can try to coffin some shit in a freighter, um, or a DST or something, but like at the end of the day, once your structures pop, everything that comes out, uh, to the victor the spoils, right? Okay. Let's talk about Pochven. Now, Pochven is kind of a weird place. It feels so weird because it's like sometimes it feels like null sec, sometimes it feels like low sec, and sometimes it feels like wormhole space, right? But it is none of those things. It's very annoying that like that. Um, but okay, so let's talk about the pros. So there are unique mechanics that distinguish the space, right? You've got the gates and all that shit that look really cool. So aesthetically, it's very unique, right? But also like the fact that like so much of Pochven is standing spaced, right? So you need standings to be able to dock in NPC stations, and then you need even higher MP or standings in order to use the station's services, which is just absolutely wild. But it really helps sell the uniqueness of Pochven and what's going on in Pochven in terms of the lore, right? Pochven has some truly high value combat anomalies. And a cool thing about those high combat anomalies is that they pay out in cash, right? It's just an it's deposit to your wallet. It's not like you're gonna get LP or shit like that. Like it is just it is just cold hard cash deposited directly into your wallet. It's a pretty sweet thing. You're also going to find some high value unique ore, right? One of the things that came with Pochven was a unique ore, some unique ores that are specific to Triglavians. And the PvP or PvE is challenging, right? This is some high, there is some high level PvE activity to be had here, right? So if you are one of those high level PvE players, right, Pochven is a place you could go to get that play experience. Um, but it is also a place where PvP happens, right? So generally, when I see um, when I see fleet pings for Pochven activities, it is usually a PvE VP or like a PvP VE type fleet because even if you're going in there with the intention of running some sites, right, doing PvE, there is a high probability that you are going to end up doing some PvP by the end of your trip. Um, and yes, there are NPC stations that you can base yourself out of if you want to. Um, on the flip side, it can feel a little crowded because there are some multi-boxers who will, fly like 10, 20 paladins or some shit. And, they can just that person, their 20 alts, their army of alts can just fucking run the site by themselves. So, that can be really annoying, right? Also, if you're not in one of the corps or alliances that has a presence in Pochven already established, you might feel like you are competing with those other groups, and it can be highly competitive, especially for those extremely valuable sites, right? And this is a very high risk area to be doing shit, right? This is high risk for mining, high risk for the PvE, right? Every aspect of Pochven is just super high risk, especially because there's a lot of traffic going through Pochven, right? A lot of people filament from nullsec to Pochven and then go somewhere else. So you might have entire fleets just traveling through Pochven, and they didn't intend to gank somebody in Pochven, but you just happen to be there, and now you're fucked because they saw you and they've got tackle on you, right? Pochven does not allow you to anchor player owned structures anymore. So, you know, RIP to your dreams of having your little fiefdom, but it is what it is. Just be aware of that. If you are going to base yourself in Podchven, you're not going to be able to put down your own structures. It's going to have to be in NPC stations, so you're going to have to grind some standings if you want to be able to use those services. As I said, standings are required to dock at NPC stations. You also need an even higher standings with the Triglavians to use the services in those stations, right? So, you know, if you just have even the slightest positive standing with Triglavians, you can dock at an NPC station. But if you want to drop a clone there, or you want to use the market or shit like that, you gotta bump up your standings, right? This is Matthew McConaughey. You gotta those are them's rookie numbers. You gotta pump those numbers way up, right? And it is important to be aware, as I discovered the hard way, that fucking around in Pochven will uh, has a high potential of severely impacting your standings, especially with Edencom, right? So my standings with Edencom are completely fucked because I am a triangle enjoyer and I shot at Edencom ships one too many times, and now Edencom hates my guts and I hate them. So, you know. Now let's look at um, we're going to look at the playstyles by activity, right? So, PvP. Um, PvP is action, action, action. It's this is the shit. It's go, go, go. It's shoot, shoot, shoot. Bang, bang, bang. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Right. This is the shit. Um, this is the stuff that makes it onto every promotional video. This is the shit that is going to make, when you see footage, most often it's going to be a PvP. Um, and there are multiple styles of PvP, right? You've got the brawls, you've got the nano small gang, you've got solo, you've got ganking, right? All kinds of PvP. Um, There is also something called the PvP shakes, or just the shakes, right? Which is like, you're having a high intensity fight, and like your brain gives you a little bit of a chemical boost. And once it's over, it's like, holy shit, I am revved up. Like I am just I've got the I've got the zoomies. Like, come on, let's fucking go. Right? That's you know, literally, some people are like shaking, like they'll hold their hands out, and their hands are shaking after a particularly intense fight. Um, Truly, one of the curses of being a veteran is that you don't get the shakes, like hardly ever, if ever, right? But it's a good feeling. It's an exciting thing, and sometimes, or oftentimes, what happens is people will get the shakes and then they want to do more PvP because holy shit, what a rush! What a fucking rush that is. Um, you can make money doing PvP, right? There's the potential to get really valuable loot, right? I think when I was in Novak, like a big portion of our SRP was paid for by loot that we looted off of motherfuckers that we had blown up, right? Um, so and some people make all their money doing PvP. I'm not at that level. I'm envious of people who make their money doing PvP. But, um, on the flip side, PvP can be expensive, right? When we, think back to the chart I showed you, right? The PvPers are always buying shit because we got to replace the ships that blow up, right? And eventually, your ship does blow up, even if you're a really good pilot, you're really good at PvP, right? at some point you are probably going to lose your shit. It could just be Eve Uni shows up in their massive blob and they are ready to wreck your shit, right? Like, you gotta hand it to the newbies. They're really super stoked to get your vagabond or whatever. Like, let them take the dub. Let them have that dub. But it does mean that you have to replace your ships, and it can get expensive. You know. Obviously, don't fly what you can't afford to lose. That's like rule number one of Eve Online. But like, because your whole playstyle is centered around blowing other ships up, other people up, and sometimes you're gonna blow up. Especially when you're just learning, you're gonna lose a lot of ships, right? And a lot of us are still learning, even if we understand the basics, right? That means your ships are gonna blow up. You're gonna get fucked over, and it's just the thing that happens, right? Or sometimes the FCs make a mistake, and even though you do everything right, the FC gets you killed, right? And that's not something that's within your control. It just fucking happens, but it gets expensive. And that brings me to my other point. Um, PvP is a skill. It is something you have to learn how to do, right? And while brawls are relatively, um, especially if you're a F1 monkey, you're doing DPS, right? The amount of skill in a brawl is a lot lower than, say, a nano small gang or solo, right? But there is still stuff you gotta learn. You gotta learn how to fly in a fleet. You gotta learn, um, you gotta learn the different ammo types, and you gotta learn how to set up your modules the way that is going to feel good for you, so that you can intuitively do stuff. You gotta learn how to listen to commands, right? Um, all that kinds of shit. It can also be character skill intensive, right? I think some people would say that you could start PvP from day one. I disagree. I think you need a week of training to get into something that is viable for PvP. So I say PvP is a character skill intensive thing. You got to train those skills to be able to actually be able to do anything, to have any real fun with it. Um, and so that's the thing to be aware of, right? And just starting out, you will oftentimes encounter players who are higher skill than you and will just be able to wreck your shit just because they are higher SP characters than you. Um, it's just the way that the cookie crumbles, right? It's not your fault or anything, it's just how it is. So, all right, PvE. Now, PvE is accessible from day one. Now, when I talk about PvE, I am talking about things like mission running, incursions. Uh, we're talking about fucking, running sites in wormholes. We're talking about running sites in Pochven, right? PvP, for fuck's sake. PvE, player versus environment, right? We are not talking about mining, right? I think some people might use PvE to also refer to mining, but I am not, right? So we're talking about mission running. Um, we're talking about fucking, um, we're talking about anomalies, combat anomalies, right? This is shooting at rats, right? This could be belt ratting, all that shit. This is fighting NPCs, right? In some way, shape, or form. Um, this is accessible from day one. And this is the beauty of it, because there are there are sites that you can run, there are missions that you can do from the day that you start playing, and you can just keep doing that, right? That so I say it's scalable, right? Which means that as you develop your skills as a pilot and your in-game character skills, right? You can, slowly progress, right? You can work your way up to L4 missions, and then you can start doing shit like incursions. You can start going to Pochven. You can start doing all kinds of wild shit out there, right? Like whatever you want to do with PvE, like you can work your way up to it, right? And there is massive ISK earning potential in PvE. I used to have this attitude that PvE was like a very low ISK kind of thing. And that was largely in part informed by my experiences in HiSec, where the money that you make from running sites in HiSec is very, very low. But once you get out to NullSec, and some places in LowSec, once you get out to nullsec and wormhole space, or even just running incursions, right? Incursions is actually pretty fucking decent money, right? Another nice thing about PvE is that it's quantifiable, right? There's lots of guides out there. Um, it is a known quantity, right? Like, even when a new site comes out, right? People are figuring that shit out. People are crunching the numbers as soon as those sites come out, right? The minute downtime ends, somebody is figuring that shit out. Some nerd with the brain of fucking magnitudes smarter than I am is figuring shit out so that you can run these sites efficiently, so that you can run them without losing your ship, so that you can get the most out of it, and so that you don't waste time, right? Like, PvP, if you want it to be, can be the kind of thing that you don't have to figure out yourself. You can just read a guide, right? Um, Sometimes PvP is the only way to get certain items, right? PvE, oftentimes you'll get BPCs or things like, faction modules and shit like that. Sometimes you can only get those from PvE, and that's, like, hey, you're contributing to the market, right? You've got the shit that other people need to make their cool blingy flits, right? So, it is also an opportunity to increase your standings, both your security status, and your standings with different factions and corporations, right? On the flip side, PvE can feel repetitive and grindy, especially if you are doing PvE because you need money, right? And you're not doing it just because you enjoy it. Like, it might be your primary playstyle, but if you start doing it also because you need money, and it can just feel so repetitive, right? And if you're grinding standings because you want to get to like L4s or whatever, it can really feel grindy, right? The grind can just, ugh, it can get under your skin sometimes, right? And if you want to do some of that high level shit, right, it can require groups to be able to do that, right? Running incursions is generally not a solo activity, right? Unless you're multi-boxing a fuck ton of characters. Same with Pochven, right? Generally, you need to be in a group to do that stuff. Uh, there is also the potential for standings loss, right? You take the wrong mission and you will hurt your standings with one of the other Empire factions, right? So if you're running Caldari missions, um, you might hurt your standings with Galente if you're not careful, right? Because some of those missions will ask you to do something that goes against the interests of the Galente Federation, right? Um, so be aware of that. It's also important to be aware that if you are a part of an alliance or a corp, most alliances and corps do not SRP PvE ships. So if you do lose it to a gank or something like that, um, chances are you're going to be paying for that entirely out of pocket. Your alliance or your corp is not likely to SRP that. They generally don't do that. There might be some medium or small corps that SRP PvE losses under certain circumstances, um, but not very many. So, all right, industry. If you do industry, you are going to be beloved by the people who buy your shit, especially if those people are your corp mates or alliance mates, right? If let me tell you, the warm, the warm fuzzy feelings I feel in my heart for the people who are building my first capital ship. Oh, oh, oh! I could write sonnets. I could write love sonnets. Fucking hell. Um, it, I'm being tongue in cheek. I'm being playful here, but seriously, it is it is a big deal to have someone who can build this shit for you, right? Places like Wormhole Space, right? Having someone who can build you a freighter in the wormhole is super helpful because now you have something you can put all your shit in if you're getting evicted, and you can safe log that freighter. But like outside of C5 space, you can't fucking get a freighter into the wormhole, right? So anywhere outside of C5 space, you need somebody to bring it in there, and generally it's kind of a dick move to put a freighter through C5 wormholes, but whatever. Um, it can also just be personally satisfying, especially if you're the kind of person who's like, taking it uh, from the very initial stages of building some shit all the way to final product, right? It can be personally very satisfying, right? Kind of scratch a certain itch in the brain, right? And some people really love that. And if that's you, industry is probably your jam, right? Industry is also something that potentially you could do solo, or mostly solo, right? Even if you're in a corp or an alliance, like you, you don't necessarily have to like. It's not a necessarily a group activity, right? You're in the alliance, you're in the corp, you're building shit, but you're doing it, like you don't have to interact with people to build your shit for the most part. Now, on the flip side, um, the margins on most of the shit that you build are going to be very slim. And in some cases, you will be losing money, right? But you might get to a place where you are selling at such volume where it doesn't even fucking matter because you're selling so much of it that you make up for it in scale or volume, right? But doing it at that scale is expensive, right? Especially if you're not harvesting all the resources that you need to build this shit yourself, right? It gets expensive. And even then it can still be rather expensive to be building shit. Um, so, be aware of that. Industry can be expensive. And as I alluded to earlier, um, you might need to be in a corp or an alliance to access the structures that you need to build the things that you're interested in building, right? If you want to build supers or titans, you're going to need to be in an alliance that has the right structures in Sovnal to build that shit, right? And it is also important to know that the shit that you build is susceptible to market manipulation. So you might be building something that at the time that you were building it, you were like, you know what? This shit sells and I can make big buck on it. But then, by the time you finish building that shit and you're ready to take it to market or you're contracting it over to somebody who does logistics, like the next thing you know, like the market crashes and now your shit ain't worth anything or it's significantly lower and now you're going to lose money on it. That can happen. All right, let's talk about mining. Now, mining is probably the chillest shit you can possibly do in this game, and it is accessible day one. You can start mining as soon as you finish the tutorial. In fact, you will be encouraged to mine as a part of the career agent missions. Um, and it is scalable with skill. So, um, as you train up, you will be able to get into better ships that allow you to mine faster, allow you to mine better ore, allow you to fly bigger ships and ships that are cool looking or weird looking or whatever. But essentially, you know, the more skills you put into mining, the more you're going to get out of it. So it's scalable in that way. Mining is also very multi-boxer friendly, especially like I recommend that people who want to learn to multi-box, like one thing you can do to sort of just like get the bare bones basics uh sort of under your belt is to try mining with multiple characters. Um Obviously if you want to do PvP, don't think that you can just multi-box mining and suddenly know how to multi-box PvP, because that's just not how this works. But mining is a very multi-boxer friendly activity, very forgiving on mistakes. Um, not as critical as PvP that should be on your game when you're multi-boxing for mining. The money that you make from mining is fairly stable, right? Occasionally the market can do some weird fuckery, but you're gonna be able to make um, you're gonna mostly know how much you're making, right? I would say the thing that is much more prone to market fluctuation is things like gas, right? So if you're huffing, right, which I guess is a form of mining, do be aware that that is more susceptible to market manipulation, um, and just market trends, right? So uh, if people aren't buying as many T3Cs, your fullerite gas is probably not going to sell for as much, right? So be aware of that. Mining is a great activity for just group chats and shit. So if you just want to hang out with your friends in a chill environment, and talk it up, mining is like perfect for that shit. Mining is also something you can do largely AFK, right? So if you're mining, if you're doing a ton of mining, you can, you know, pull up your favorite streaming app and catch up on your favorite TV shows. Like that's that's mining, right? On the flip side, mining is extremely repetitive and can be very boring as shit, right? If you're not the person who has the kind of disposition for this shit, it will be very boring. Or maybe you normally love mining, but your head is just in a weird place on a particular day. It might seem really boring and stupid, right? Miners are easy targets for gankers, right? And it is not especially hard to gank miners. So, be aware of that. Also, be aware that it can require you to be a part of a corp or an alliance to access some of the most valuable ores, right? So, like the R64, I think I mentioned that earlier. R64 is a highly sought after Moongu, um, or class of type of Moongu. R64 moons are relatively rare and highly sought after, and generally all the R64 moons that are out there are going to be highly guarded by the um, alliances and corps who live in that space or own that space, depending on if it's NPC null or Sov null. So do be aware of that, and consider that if you want to mine that shit, if you want to mine some of the most valuable ores, you are probably going to need to join one of the Sovnal Corps or Sovnal alliances in order to get access to that shit. So, all right, let's talk about trade. Now, trade is as I mentioned before, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around just what an impact trade has on every other aspect of New Eden, right? Just because it can feel so far removed. Um, of course, if you do trading, you probably have some sense of the impact that trading has on the rest of New Eden. But, you know, so let's talk about the pros. You can stay docked the entire time if you wish, right? Um, there is very little reason for a trader to undock unless you're doing that thing where you move, where you buy in one station and move to the other. I believe they call that station trading, but you know, you don't have to do that kind of trading if you don't want to. Um, it is entirely possible to stay in one station and, you know, fuck shit up on the market. It is scalable with skill, right? So you can start out as an alpha character and do some basic trading and then work your way up, right? To the point where you're doing some, you know, large scale market manipulation to, short selling some shit to make quick isk. Um, and it is a way of making a lot of money. But it is important to realize that this is essentially PvP, right? You are fighting with other players. The battlefield might look different, and you, as I said, you can stay docked. You don't have to get into a ship, but you are competing with other players, and so a lot of times we jokingly refer to it as market PvP. I have definitely gotten my ass handed to me in market PvP, and I don't do trading really. I've definitely considered getting into trading, but then I think about all the times I've lost money when I wasn't even really trying to trade. I wasn't like fully into it. I was just trying to sell some shit or buy some shit, and I got fucked over completely by people who knew way more than I did about the market trends. So, be aware of that. But traders are indispensable parts of alliances and corporations, um, or even just, your friends. It can be really nice to have a friend who is a trader who can help you get the best deals, um, you know, lowest tax rates, all that good stuff. At the highest level, you can have wide-ranging impact on New Eden, right? You have the potential to completely fuck the markets up if that's the kind of thing you want to do. But you should be aware that trading is a high-risk activity. No, you may not lose any ships, or at least you're not going to lose ships via explosion, but you could lose in terms of your sales. You could, you know, you might get suckered into buying a whole bunch of shit that doesn't move fast. You thought you knew which way the winds were blowing, and now you're stuck with 60 10 MN afterburners for some fucking reason. Like, congratulations, you played yourself, right? And if you do, like day trading shit, that stuff can be repetitive, right? Really, really repetitive. Now, some people might find that relaxing, right? But if that's not your disposition, or maybe it is, but you're in a weird place, your head's in a weird place, right? This stuff can really get under your skin because it is so repetitive. It is also important to realize that high level trade is omega locked. You can do some low level trading on an alpha alt, or maybe your main is an alpha alt or an alpha character, right? But do be aware that trade is largely an omega locked skill, or an omega locked activity. All right, logistics. Oh, I fucking love logistics, but there are some things you should be aware about it. Now, logistics is moving shit around, right? Getting shit from point A to point B. It's space trucking, right? Um, Now, it's a mostly chill activity, right? And there is guaranteed job security because everybody needs their shit moved. And even people who can do it themselves are going to run into occasions where they just don't have the time, they don't have the energy, or, maybe for other reasons, they don't want to go to point B, right? And so there will always be a need for people who are willing to move shit for other people. So, job security. You'll also have the opportunity to fly some really cool looking ships. I personally think, um, freighters look cool. Jump freighters also really cool, right? These are big ass ships and they look cool. Okay. And if flying stuff around, if space trucking sounds like fun to you, well, you too might get to fly really big fucking ships. Um, but some things to be aware of. Uh, if you are independent, you're not part of a corp, you're not part of an alliance, anything like that, it can be hard to make money doing this, right? Because you're going to have to establish your own contacts. You're going to, find your own clients and all that shit to make your ISK. And there are a lot of scams out there, right? So you can get fucked over by a bad contract, right? Do be aware that you are a prime target for gankers, right? Whether you're flying in a DST, a freighter, or a jump freighter, uh, you are a juicy kill mail, um, and people would love to blow you up. It does require a significant investment of skills into training up what you need to be able to fly the right ships, right? It's always a heartbreaking moment when somebody asks me, like, hey, I just got into, insert T1 hauler ship, you know, how can I make money hauling with this thing? And the answer is you can't. you know, I mean, maybe if somebody, maybe somebody will humor you and pay you a little money to haul their shit in your Nereus or whatever, like, or your sigil or whatever. But like, by and large, you need to be flying DSTs at a bare minimum, um, DSTs and blockade runners. But most of logistics is going to be in freighters and jump freighters. And for that reason, logistics is basically a mega locked, right? I can't think of a scenario in which you could do it as an alpha because you can't fly the right ships on an alpha character. Um, and as with these other things, it is slow and it can be boring. If you're not about that chill, slow paced play style, logistics is probably not for you. Or maybe you're the kind of person who's like, you know what, I like to take breaks from the high intensity PvP, right? Like me. Logistics might be your thing, but maybe you're not in the right headspace. Maybe this isn't your gig. It will seem slow and boring to you, right? Last but not least, exploration. So exploration is one of the activities that is accessible from day one, and in fact, you will be encouraged on day one of playing to do some exploration. Um, One of the cool things about exploration and why I highly recommend it to new players, along with gas huffing, is is the fact that there is the possibility of earning a lot of ISK early on relative to your relative to what other things you could be doing to earn ISK. As a day one character, you could potentially earn some good money doing exploration, and it is scalable with skill, right? So at the beginning, you're going to be looking for null data and relic sites, right? But eventually, you can start, eventually you might start running superior sleeper sites, covert caches and shit, right? That's all exploration, and it's cool. Exploration is one of those things that will probably take you all over New Eden if you want, right? If you devote yourself to exploration as your primary playstyle, you will probably go all over New Eden and you will see some cool shit, right? And it's something that you can do by yourself if you want, right? It's kind of hard to do it as like a group activity. I've done Explo in a group, right? But it was kind of weird. It was fun, but it was weird, and it isn't really how exploration is designed to be done. So, we were just kind of fucking about. But generally, exploration is a solo activity. And on the flip side of that, you are going to be a prime target for gankers, especially in wormhole space, right? Wormholers um, like blowing up explorers, especially newbie explorers. That seal clubbing is what they call it. Also, the loot can be real RNG based, meaning, um, you know, on 1 minute you can loot a can and wow, I made 50 million ISK, and then the next can it's like, oh, I basically got a lump of coal. Cool, great, thanks CCP. And it can also be really lonely, right? Like that can be a that is a con for some, right? Exploration is very much a solo activity, and that can be lonely for some, right? If you play this game, this is a social game. This is an MMO. A lot of people play these to play with other people, right? But exploration is one of those solo things, and it can be very lonely. In fact, I used to be in Signal Cartel, not on my main, but on another character. And one of the things I really hated about being in Signal Cartel, where the primary focus is exploration, was just how lonely it was. Like, the people were really nice, but I never got a chance to hang out with them because exploration is a solo activity that took me all over New Eden, and I never got a chance to actually hang out with any of um, the other uh, the other people in Signal Cartel, which kind of sucked. So, all right. To wrap this up, what is fun for you is going to depend on a few different things. What's your preferred pace of play? If you like fast, if you like fast and explodey, right? Go to low sec. Low sec is probably a great place for you. But you can do well in null sec or wormhole space too. Do you want to play with your friends or do you want to play solo? Right? If you mostly want to play solo, things like um, you could do PvP, you could do trading, you could do fucking mining, you could do exploration, right? It's also going to depend on your risk tolerance. How much are you willing to risk, right? If you have a low risk tolerance, trading is probably not for you. PvP is probably not for you. And how willing are you to learn new things? How willing are you to spend time practicing shit trying to get better, right? Because if you're willing to learn new things all the time and practice shit, PvP might be right up your alley, right? Because that's definitely a thing that takes practice and which requires you to learn new things. Be aware that where you play in New Eden is just as much a variable that changes the game and the way the activities feel and how it works for you, right? Also be aware that PvP is inevitable. Now just because it's inevitable, right, does not mean that it has to be your primary playstyle. Okay? PvP is gonna happen, right? You are a miner, you might get ganked, right? You do logistics, you might get blown up, right? PvP is inevitable. It just happens. There is no limitations. Even with Concord, you are not 100% safe in high sec, right? So it's going to happen, and it doesn't mean that you have to uh, make PvP your primary playstyle just because it's inevitable. If you don't really like PvP, you don't have to do it all the time. But it may be helpful. In fact, it absolutely would be helpful to learn some PvP, right? To learn a few things. And some alliances and some corps do require PvP participation, right? Um, so be aware of that. And it's also possible that your primary playstyle may change over time. And, sometimes real life gets in the way, and maybe you can't dedicate the kind of time that a certain playstyle required of you. Maybe you just don't have as much time to play Eve as you used to. And so, the kinds of things that you can do in Eve are different now. You know, um, that happens, and that's just a part of life, and that's okay. Uh, so, hopefully, this helped. If you liked this video, I know it was kind of long because I really went in depth there on a few things. But if you like this video, please be sure to give me a like on the video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel um, and share it with friends who are curious about what they should do in EVE Online if they're going to start playing. Maybe help them decide what they want to do and where. Fly dangerously, my friends.